welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, everybody. This is Barney Levantino at Syosset Library, and you are on our Turn the Page podcast. I'm happy today to welcome author Jody Millman. Jody is a New York resident, a New York author with her latest mystery book is out. The title is Hooker Avenue, and it is a sequel, I guess, to The Midnight Call. So, Jody, welcome. And before we get into the book, you're an author. You've written some nonfiction work as well, and I noticed you have the Seats books. Talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into Hooker Avenue.
Well, I inherited the Seats. My father came up with the idea like in the late 90s because he and my mom kept going to the theater and they kept getting really crummy tickets. So he came up with this idea, let's do a book that has all the theaters, all the venues, all the seating charts, how to get free seats, how to get there, how to get the phone numbers, everything. So he came up with this really it's like a Zaggett's Guide to Broadway. And he unexpectedly passed away. It became a bestseller for the publisher. So they came to me and they said, look, would you pick up the mantle, which is what I did. Mm-hmm. So we did 2 editions of New York and we did one of Chicago. And it was so much fun. I got to go to all the theaters. I got to talk to everybody. And they still use our charts for their seating plans.
Well,
if you go to the box offices, sometimes you'll see they're using our charts.
So that's terrific. And a lot of good perks coming in with that as well. You get to go everywhere and see the shows and see where to go. So anyway, I had to ask you about that because I noticed it on the bio and I said, oh, this looks interesting.
It's fun.
Let's get back to, then you became a novelist.
Yes.
And among other, you've got a variety of careers going, and you've got a lot of things happening. You're a practicing attorney?
Part-time.
Part-time.
I'm more retired than anything else at this point.
So now you're more of a writer, which is terrific.
Exactly, yes.
So let's now get into it. Let's talk about Hooker Avenue.
Sure.
And let's tell our audience all about it.
Well, it's, as you mentioned, it's a sequel to the first book, which was The Midnight Call. And it picks up with my protagonist, Jessie Martin, as she's driving down the road one night on the way to the market, and she gets caught in a thunderstorm. She's been harassed over the telephone by the teacher, Terrence Butterfield, who she helped put away in the prior book, and he's been stalking her. So Jessie's rattled by a phone call. She pulls over, and off in the distance, she sees what she believes to be a person lying in a ditch. So as a good Samaritan, she rushes off to try to help. And that's how the story begins. The story sets in motion. And this person that's in the ditch is a mysterious woman who leads her into the path of her estranged best friend, who's Detective Ebony Jones, her former nemesis, her legal nemesis, Jeremy Kaplan, the mysterious woman, Lizzie Sexton, who's a prostitute, and the attacker, John Doe. So there's a lot that goes on in this book.
There is indeed a lot that goes on. And I'm gonna circle back right now because you mentioned that Lizzie is working as a prostitute, and prostitutes kind of figure fairly prominently in the story. There are a number of victims involved. We'll talk about it. The book involves a parent serial killer in the Poughkeepsie area. And the title of the book, Hooker Avenue, obviously is going in a couple of different directions. There is indeed a Hooker Avenue in Poughkeepsie, right?
Yes, it's about 200 yards from where I'm sitting right now.
Okay.
And it was named after a prestigious attorney, circuit court judge, landowner here in Poughkeepsie. But there's also another twist that I mentioned in the book when it comes to Hooker Avenue.
Okay. So yeah, we got to get into that and talk about that. Your characters are all local characters, and they all share not just professional, but personal histories. among and between the various characters in the book. And the question is, how much do those personal relationships impact or kind of steer the nature of the investigation which goes on? And would the investigation have happened in the same way had these characters all been essentially strangers to one another?
Well, it's the personal relationships that create the tension and the conflict in the novel. That's really at the heart of the novel. You have three women. You have Jessie, who's an attorney. You have her strange best friend, Detective Ebony Jones. And right there, you have two, not only because of their personal past, professionally they have a past, because Ebony believes that Jessie was responsible for screwing up one of the biggest cases that the Poughkeepsie Police Department ever had. And they also sit on two sides of the legal fence. You have one person, Jessie, who's a criminal defense attorney. On the other side, you have the detective who wants to catch the bad guy and put them in jail, which is Jessie's job. Jessie's job is to protect them. So you have that professional tension, the personal tension, and then you have Lissy coming in, this third party, who really is the glue right now that binds these two women together, because she is the client of Jessie's new boss. So Jessie is duty bound to do whatever she has to do to protect this woman. Meanwhile, Ebony needs this woman to assist in a cold case investigation, because she feels that Lissy is the key to unlocking this particular investigation.
There's also another relationship going on with Jessie, and there's a little bit of a tension there as well, in that her boyfriend, her essentially live-in lover, happens to be the district attorney, which also places an interesting twist on their relationship vis-a-vis the criminal defense attorney and the district attorney, who typically would be leaning more towards where the police are coming from versus where Jessie might be. So there's also that interesting interplay and the tension between them as well.
Well, what's interesting about Hal, and really the way that I like to structure my books, is I like to give my readers a 360-degree view of what a criminal procedure is like, what a proceeding is like. So you have the attorney, you have the detective, and you basically have the judge. You have the person who's the prosecutor. So you're getting this tension. And poor Hal, he's really, as you say, caught in between Jessie and his love for her, and also trying to do the right thing. And he feels extremely guilty. He has a lot of personal baggage, because before he was district attorney, he was in charge of felony prosecutions in Dutchess County as the assistant district attorney. So he feels that once he discovers that there's something afoot here, that he feels that he was responsible, that he kind of his office, and he let this slide. So not only is he getting pressure from these two women in his life, he's putting a great deal of pressure on himself as well.
There's also, I had made a note, and I'm looking at as you're answering that question, that a lot of these procedural type books, whether it's a police procedure or a legal procedure, they approach it really from the perspective of the primary protagonist, and you get a somewhat narrow view of the process. In this particular case, and in your book, as you mentioned, you've looked at it from the perspective of the police investigator, the criminal defense attorney, the district attorney, and then you also throwing in, I guess, the other elephant in the room in a major case investigation, the political side of it, which oftentimes comes into play, and how the politics and the appearance of the investigation can sometimes steer the investigation in a particular way, or you get some prodding to push the investigation to get an outcome that certain political interests might be looking for. So you get that interplay as well, which really is a nice addition to the whole process and understanding what goes on.
And, in this book, it's an election year. So all of these characters who are in the ultimate decision-making position have, as you say, Barney, have to take that into consideration. How is this going to look to the public? And one thing also that Ebony points out, Here she's a cop, but she sees that there's been a basic inequality in the way that these victims or these alleged victims have been treated and have been investigated. So that's another aspect of the book that I wanted to point out. And that really came to head with this whole Gabby Petito investigation and how there's really an inequality in the types of cases and missing persons cases that are getting attention. And Ebony is keenly aware of that. And that's a driving force for her to get this job done. And to get
that comes across really early in the book, where she's in the station house and she's walking past the board with the photos and information about what are essentially cold cases. Right. And she's really the only one that is kind of taking an interest in these. And she's the one that really starts to connect the dots with the whole situation that's going on in the book with the current crime and tracing it back and locating the perpetrator. So she's really the mover of the investigation. She gets it going. And without her, all this would have kind of stayed buried.
And the sad part is, Barney, that when I was doing my investigation, what Ebony was going through is actually the state of the way things are in New York, because in researching the New York State Missing Persons Database has not been updated in about 10 years. And there really is no mechanism for towns to report missing women and missing cases so that these victims and alleged victims can be linked together. And that was also, and this goes back to, if you look at the actual case upon which this story was inspired.
I was going to ask you about that as well.
You'll find that was true. Back in 1998, you had, from 1996 to 1998, you had 8 women who disappeared. All of their families had reported them missing. To the district attorney, to their different police departments, nobody lifted a finger. And it wasn't until they all joined together and brought political pressure in an election year that this task force was enacted in order to find the actual missing victims.
So how much of the story is based upon that actual case?
I can tell you that, and the way that I write is I take the seedling of the story. In other words, the idea of 8 missing prostitutes taken and trying to find out what is going on and what is the link. But as far as the identities of the characters, all of the characters are fiction. All of the characters are figments of my imagination. But I try to, when people look at this, they'll know it's the Francois Kendall case, because that was such a shocking case here in the Hudson Valley. And it does mirror it. It's inspired by it, but it's not based on it.
You talk about the cold cases, and you had 8 missing women here on Long Island. You had happenstance, the Gilgo Beach murders, where
right.
They discovered just one after another, right. A whole series of bodies. Many of which were sex workers who ended up buried on a beachside on the South Shore of Long Island. And those are still open cases with, at least to the public, very, very little progress being made. Those cases do get publicity now. So people are aware of it. And I guess the political pressure is on the police department and the district attorney to try to move the case along somehow. It's been slow going. I think it's going on 10 years now, and they're still.
I see that in the news. As I was working on the book, I think they discovered a couple bodies, and part of the problem when you have sex workers disappearing is that some of the time, or for a long period of time, you don't know they've disappeared, because these are women who are transients. They're women who have addiction problems and who really aren't on. Who people aren't really keeping track of. And so that's really the sad thing about that. And it's really a travesty. It's really a travesty.
It's hard. And also, but again, people forget, and Ebony points it out, that these women, they were sex workers, but they were daughters, they were nieces, they were cousins, they were sisters. They're people. And you lose track of the urgency for the families to try to get some sense of closure and to understand what happened and how it happened. So in that regard, I mean, the book really sheds light on the problem, and hopefully people will get a little bit more motivated to start looking into some of these cold cases. There are a lot of changes that happened to your primary characters towards the end of the book, and I don't want to do any give away any spoilers, but again, relationships and positions are evolving, and I'm curious as to where we're going next with them.
Well, it's a series. It's called the Queen City Crime Series, and so the characters. I'm in the process of writing the book right now, and I can give you some hints.
That's all.
Okay, we're leaving the land, and the next crime is going to occur in the waves of the mysterious and murky Hudson River, and it's going to involve a disappearance on the Hudson, and one of the major characters is going to lose someone very near and dear to them in connection with that disappearance, and we're going to see more secrets. We're going to see more deceptions that exist with all of these characters that are going to be revealed in this next mystery as it unfolds. So these characters are around for a while, and I'm introducing some new characters because I've been dealing mostly with people who are younger and in their 30s. There's going to be a new district attorney, and she's going to be in her 50s. And I wanted to get a more mature perspective into the mix of the story. So I'm having a lot of fun writing her, because I guess I'm closer to her age than to my other characters.
Well, that's a good teaser. It sounds interesting. What, in terms of your process, do you come across, the underlying case which is of interest to you, and then you kind of build your story around it, or do you work from what would I like my characters to be doing, and you try to find something that fits in there? How does it work for you? How does your process go?
Well, in the Midnight Call and also in Hooker Avenue, I had a personal connection to both of these cases. In the Midnight Call, it involved a teacher who basically slaughtered a student, a high school student. And it turns out when I was in junior high school, I had a history teacher whose name was Albert Fentress. And then 10 years later, he was found guilty of murdering a student who trespassed through his yard. So in that particular case, I knew the killer. He'd been my teacher. I knew the family of the victim. I knew all the judges. I knew everyone involved. So that was a story that I felt that I really had to tell. With Hooker Avenue, in 1995, a business partner and I bought a building, and it turns out that the building came with a slew of prostitutes who used to hang out on our front steps. And these prostitutes were the women who Kendall Francois solicited and unfortunately dispatched. So again, that was a story that literally fell on the doorstep of my office. This next story, I have more of a tenuous connection with, and I know some of the characters who are involved. I have friendships and relationships with other characters related to the actual crime. So I always like to have some kind of personal connection, and that stimulates me to want to tell the story in a different way. You know what I mean? It makes it more personal for me to tell, and more personal for me to be able to relate to my readers.
I asked the question. I always talk to all the authors that I speak to about how they go about it and what their process is, and it's always fascinating to me how it's so different for everybody. The approach is just such a personal approach. And for me, that's why I'm old school. I like the printed book in my hand, and it really is. I mean, a lot of my colleagues are, it's all e-readers and it's all online. But for me, having the book in my hand, I feel it's also a connection between me, the characters, the author. It just seems a much more personal experience. But again, I'm old school, so I'm closer to the age of the new DA as well. In fact, I'm way past that. But
They don't come to me in a dream. You know, you talk to some writers, oh, this came to me in a dream. And, you know, I mean, I'm an attorney. I'm trained that way. So I'm very reality bound.
Excuse me. Sorry. It flew right past me what I wanted to ask you. So from here, you're going on to the new book, which will be coming out roughly when? You have a time frame for that one? Because this just came out, I know.
I have a really tight publication schedule because the Midnight Call is being re-released in September. Okay. And then next spring, the new book, which is tentatively called The Empty Kayak, will be released. So, you know, I don't like to keep readers hanging too long. The Midnight Call came out in 2019. So that was a couple of years. So readers will hopefully have more satisfaction when The Empty Kayak comes out.
Well, the book is really fascinating. I enjoyed it. I have not read The Midnight Call. I have to admit to that.
Okay,
but I will go back. I will definitely go back.
That's good.
And I will have it read, and I will have a new one read by the time the next one comes out. We can talk again about it. It has really been fun talking with you. Good luck with the newest one, with the Hooker Avenue book, and keep plugging away on the other one. You mentioned The Empty Kayak, and in my head, I'm kind of thinking about. I seem to remember a case that might be fitting the bill a little bit, and because I think that was in the news not that long ago as well. So this has really been fun. Good luck with it, and come see us again next time around. Okay.
I will, and if people want to read more about me or find out information, they can go to my website, which is Jody, Jode, Millman.com. And hopefully any questions, they can also email me. So I'm there, I'm accessible. And this has been so much fun, Barney. Thank you for reading the book.
You know what? While you're talking, the other question that came to mind, you also run a workshop for writers.
Yes,
right?
I do.
Tell me a little bit about that, because it looked interesting. And I'm sorry, I know I was closing it out, but I'm keeping you on now.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's called the Writers Law School. And I came up with the idea because I would go to a lot of conferences and my friends would come up and they say, hey, you're a writer, you know, and they try to, you know, get some legal advice. And I was saying, you know, nobody is doing this. So I decided to come up with an idea where I instruct writers on what is intellectual property, trademarks, copyrights, patents, how the basics on publishing contracts, about what is a fair use of a work, what is a public domain. And it's really interesting. And I've had a lot of response to it. And it's really wonderful that I'm able to share what I know and love with writers, because I don't want to see anybody taken advantage of.
Okay. It sounds interesting. And I knew it popped into my head and I lost it for a second, but I got it back. And thank you so much. Good luck with all of it. And let's talk again when the next one comes out.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Barney, and enjoy your summer.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And that will wrap it for this edition of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.